We fell in love in Melbourne, Australia, and planned on flying our 4 parents and a few relatives from Glasgow, UK, to join us for our wedding. But our parents insisted we returned home for the wedding, which we did. On the wedding day, not a single one of them showed up. Why? Because they couldn't agree on the guest list or the venue. We had to cancel the wedding and fly back the very next day. 6 months later, they discovered through the banks a new reality staring them squarely in the face, which they were too powerless to confront or avoid. Keep watching to see how their unspeakable betrayal was met with a fitting response. Callum and I met over a patient chart at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. I was a pediatric specialist running the neurology ward, and he was a senior surgical nurse. We recognized the accents immediately. We were both from Glasgow. We were both expats who had abandoned the failing infrastructure of the National Health Service for the better pay and functional healthcare system down south, and coincidentally, both of us were the only children of our parents. We shared a shift, then a coffee, then a flat in South Yarra. 2 years later, he asked me to marry him. We wanted a quiet ceremony on the beach in St. Kilda. We planned to pay for our parents to fly over, booking business class tickets for all 4 of them. When we called to tell them, the complaints started before we even finished the sentence. My mother refused to sit on a plane for 24 hours. Callum's father claimed the Australian heat would trigger his blood pressure. They formed an immediate alliance across city lines and demanded we return to Glasgow for the wedding. They insisted a wedding was about family, about the community, and about honoring where we came from. We were exhausted from working 60-hour weeks at the hospital, but we wanted to do the right thing. We cancelled the Melbourne plans. We lost the deposits, of course. We wired £40,000 to a wedding planner in Glasgow. We booked a historic castle in the West End as our venue and rented a boutique hotel for the evening reception. We asked our parents for a guest list. That was our first catastrophic mistake. Because we lived in Australia, we allowed our parents to handle the physical distribution of the invitations to their friends and our extended relatives. They treated the guest list like a territorial war. My parents wanted their golf club friends invited. Callum's parents wanted a list of distant cousins he had not seen since childhood. The demands escalated over the next 6 months, culminating in vicious arguments over the seating chart and the catering menu. We mediated the disputes from 8,000 miles away over crackling phone lines, ignoring the warning signs because we foolishly believed that on the actual day they would put their egos aside. We took 3 weeks of unpaid leave, flew to Scotland, and checked into our hotel. The simmering Cold War exploded at the rehearsal dinner. My mother saw the finalized seating chart and realized Callum's parents were placed equally at the front table. Callum's mother, in response, proudly announced she would be wearing an ivory gown to the reception to ensure she stood out. The argument devolved into a screaming match in the middle of the upscale restaurant. My father demanded Callum's parents be moved to the second tier. Callum's father demanded my mother be banned from the top table entirely. They turned to us, their faces red with entitlement, and issued synchronized ultimatums. They told us that if we did not fix the arrangements to their exact specifications by the next morning, they would not attend the wedding. They stormed out of the restaurant, leaving us sitting alone with the bill. We were exhausted, but we genuinely believed it was just theatrical bluffing. We thought they would never actually abandon their only children at the altar. The next morning, I put on my dress. Callum put on his kilt. We drove to the historic castle in the West End. The florist had arranged the white roses. The string quartet was tuning their instruments. The priest was standing at the altar, doing his final preparations. We waited in the vestibule. The clock hit 1. The ceremony was scheduled for 1:45 p.m. The castle was completely, unnervingly empty. Not a single person had walked through the heavy oak doors. At 1:30, Callum pulled out his phone and called his father. I stood next to him and listened to the audio bleed through the speaker. His father sounded entirely unbothered, defensive even. He stated that after the screaming match the night before, he absolutely refused to sit in a castle where his family was treated as second-class citizens. He casually added that he had instructed all his relatives to wait at their respective hotels until my parents conceded the top table arrangements. Callum hung up. He looked at me, his face completely pale. I took out my phone and called my mother. She answered on the first ring. I asked her where she and her friends were. She sighed, a sharp sound of irritation, and told me she was sitting in her living room. That she told her golf club friends the actual wedding ceremony was going to be an intimate family affair, just the bride and groom and their parents, and that she had told her entire side of the guest list to just meet at the reception later. At the end, neither set of parents showed up at our wedding. They were simply so consumed by their own petty rivalry and social standing that they had both independently decided to use their attendance as a weapon against each other. And because they controlled the guest list, they had effectively barricaded their respective factions, completely ignoring the fact that in the crossfire of their ego trip, they had abandoned their only children at the altar. They hadn't even thought about us. I looked at the empty wooden pews. I looked at the string quartet fidgeting with their sheet music. I looked at Callum. He nodded. I told my mother she would not need to worry about the reception anymore. I pressed end. We walked down the aisle together, stopped at the altar, and told the bewildered priest we were canceling the ceremony. We walked out the back doors of the castle and stepped into the cold Scottish rain. We realized in that exact moment that our parents did not actually care about us at all. We were not their son and daughter. We were just the battlefield they were using to fight their own war of egos. We had moved across the world, leaving behind dear friends who yearned to be a part of our special day, just to satisfy their request to return home for marriage, but it turned out we had spent our life savings handing them the weapons to hurt us. We returned to the hotel and took the elevator directly to the bridal suite. I unzipped the wedding dress and left it on the floor. Callum took off his kilt and folded it onto the bed. We put on jeans and heavy sweaters. We opened our suitcases and packed our clothes. We did not speak much, because the betrayal was far too deep for a conversation. We walked down to the lobby and checked out of the hotel at 3 p.m. We explicitly instructed the hotel management to permanently cancel the evening reception, clear the ballroom, and distribute the catered food to the staff and the rest to food banks. We hailed a black cab and told the driver to take us directly to Glasgow Airport. We went to the ticket counter and paid a heavy penalty fee to change our return flights from 2 weeks away to that exact evening. We sat in the departure lounge, eating cold sandwiches from a kiosk, watching the clock. Our phones started ringing frantically at exactly 6 o'clock. It was the exact time the lavish reception was supposed to begin. Our parents had arrived at the boutique hotel, dressed to the nines, flanked by their golf club friends and distant cousins, fully expecting to hold court. Instead, they had walked into a reception hall where the staff was actively breaking down the tables, stripping the linens, and throwing away the centerpieces. They had realized the hotel was completely empty of a wedding reception. They realized, in front of dozens of their peers, that we had not caved to their ultimatums. The humiliation they had tried to inflict on us had backfired spectacularly in public. We watched the missed calls pile up, turned our phones off, boarded the flight to Dubai, connected to Melbourne, and landed 30 hours later. We went straight to our flat in South Yarra, unpacked our bags, and sat at the small kitchen table. The silence in the apartment was heavy, but it was not sad. It was the definitive silence of a permanently severed tie. We needed to address the financial reality of our relationship with our parents. We were highly paid medical professionals, but we were absolutely not millionaires. We did not have the liquid cash to buy property outright. Years ago, when the guilt of leaving our parents behind had set in, we made a catastrophic sacrifice. We decided to give them the lives they always bitterly complained they never had. We drained our entire combined life savings to put down massive upfront deposits on 2 large, expensive houses in Kelvinside, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Glasgow. Because we wanted them to have the social pride of homeownership, we had the deeds and the massive 30-year mortgages drawn up entirely in their names. But they were pensioners living on fixed incomes. They could not afford the debt. So we took on the burden. We lived in a cramped flat. We drove secondhand cars. We picked up grueling overtime shifts at the hospital, sacrificing our own physical health just to keep their extravagant lifestyles afloat. We stretched our own finances to the absolute breaking point, sending thousands of pounds across the world every single month to fund their bank accounts. They knew we were working 60-hour weeks to pay the banks. They knew the physical toll the night shifts took on us. Yet, they sat in the very houses we were bleeding ourselves dry to pay for, and intentionally sabotaged our wedding over a seating chart. The realization of that profound asymmetry, our total financial sacrifice versus their total emotional indifference, was the blade that finally cut the cord. A week before we flew to Glasgow for the wedding, we had logged into our bank accounts and prepaid 6 months of the mortgages. We did this to ensure no payments would bounce while we were traveling. We had given them a 6-month financial runway. I opened my laptop. Callum opened his. We logged into our respective banking portals. We navigated to the International Standing Orders page. I found the recurring monthly transfer from my parents' Kelvinside address. I hovered the cursor over the screen. I thought about the overtime. I thought about the empty castle. I clicked cancel. A prompt asked if I was sure. Yes, of course. Callum did the exact same thing for his parents. We deleted the transfers entirely. We deleted the reminders in our phones for their birthdays. We closed the laptops and went to sleep. The next morning, we put on our scrubs and went back to work at the Royal Children's Hospital. I performed neurological assessments on infants. Callum prepped toddlers for surgery. We lived our lives. Over the next 6 months, they sent furious text messages blaming us for embarrassing them in front of their friends at the hotel. We read the messages and deleted them. We worked. We saved our money. For the first time in years, we kept our own full paychecks. The financial relief was immediate and staggering. Without the massive burden of the Kelvinside mortgages draining our accounts, we finally bought a beautiful house near the hospital. We knew exactly what was coming. We knew our parents lived entirely paycheck to paycheck, despite the illusion of wealth they projected. They assumed our compliance was guaranteed. They miscalculated badly. The 6-month runway was a countdown. We watched the calendar hit the end of the 6th month, knowing the UK banks would soon attempt to draw the massive funds for the 7th month. We felt no pity. We simply went to work. Month 7 arrived. The automated systems at the Royal Bank of Scotland attempted to pull the massive mortgage payments for the Kelvinside properties. The requests were immediately rejected. The accounts lacked sufficient funds. The banks generated automated default notices and mailed them directly to our parents' addresses. When the terrifying letters arrived, our phones in Melbourne started firing on all cylinders. The occasional text messages from our parents demanding apologies transformed into a barrage of frantic missed calls. They left voicemails. The tone of their voices shifted rapidly over the next 2 weeks. First, they sounded confused. My mother left a message saying there was a glitch with the international bank transfer and asked me to fix it before her credit was impacted. Then, they sounded angry. Callum's father left a screaming message calling us ungrateful, spiteful children, demanding we restore the payments immediately before the bank took action. Finally, they sounded utterly terrified. They realized we were not going to fix the transfer. They realized the money was permanently gone. We listened to the voicemails while eating dinner in our new home, and we deleted them without a second thought. Month 8 arrived. The banks issued formal notices of arrears. Month 9 arrived. The banks officially initiated foreclosure proceedings. Our parents tried to sell their cars to cover the debts, but those could cover less than 40% of the 3-month arrears. They tried to ask their golf club friends for emergency loans to stop the banks. Their friends, realizing the wealth had always been a fabricated illusion funded by their children, immediately distanced themselves and abandoned them. The legal proceedings in the United Kingdom moved swiftly and ruthlessly. Because the deeds and the mortgages were entirely in our parents' names, we were legally untouchable. The debt belonged exclusively to them. By month 11, the bailiffs arrived at the Kelvinside properties. We tracked the entire process through the Public Property Registry online from our living room in Melbourne. We watched the ownership status of the grand houses flip from private to bank-owned. Our parents were formally evicted. They had absolutely nowhere to go. Their credit scores were completely obliterated, rendering them unable to rent even a basic apartment on the private market. They were forced to apply for emergency housing through the Glasgow City Council. The council assessed their dire financial situation, noted their complete lack of assets and ruined credit, and placed them in the only available emergency accommodations. They were assigned to a brutalist concrete council estate in Springburn. They moved from a neighborhood of historic mansions and manicured lawns to a neglected tower block with broken elevators, damp walls, and barred windows. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 12 months after we stood in the empty castle in the West End, the hospital switchboard paged me. The operator stated it was an emergency international call. I picked up the heavy plastic receiver at the nurse's station. It was my mother. She sounded hollow. All the arrogant bluster and entitlement had been completely stripped away by a year of grinding reality. She did not yell. She did not make demands. She asked me a single, trembling question. She asked why we had destroyed their lives. I held the receiver against my ear and looked across the brightly lit ward at Callum. He was carefully adjusting an intravenous drip for a recovering pediatric patient. He looked up, caught my gaze, and instantly knew exactly who was on the phone. I looked back at the medical chart in my hand. I spoke clearly and clinically into the receiver, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I told her we did not destroy their lives. I told her we had spent years destroying our own lives to fund theirs, and we simply stopped paying for the privilege of being treated like garbage. I told her that when she and Callum's parents chose to maliciously boycott their only children's wedding over a petty seating chart, they permanently set the price of our relationship. I did not wait for her to formulate a response or begin crying. I placed the receiver firmly back onto the cradle. The line disconnected, severing the connection across the globe. The hospital ward was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors and the soft hum of the ventilation system. I walked over to Callum. He finished securing the medical line, patted the sleeping child's blanket, and turned to me. I nodded. He nodded back. We did not celebrate. We did not gloat or revel in their misery. We just felt a profound, weightless peace as the final, heavy thread of our toxic past snapped and dissolved into nothing. We washed our hands at the clinical stainless steel sink, dried them thoroughly on paper towels, and walked down the sterile corridor together to check on the next patient, leaving the ghosts of Glasgow entirely behind us.